Imagine going to sleep perfectly healthy and waking up with a death sentence. No warning, no time to prepare, just a sudden fever burning through your body. Then the swellings appear, dark, grotesque lumps under your arms, along your neck, in your groin. They grow to the size of apples, turning black as they fill with blood and pus. You have maybe 3 days, maybe less, sometimes just hours. Your family can't help you. Doctors can't save you. Priests offer prayers, but even they're dying faster than anyone else. Within a week, everyone you love might be dead. Your neighbors, your children, gone. Church bells ring constantly, counting the dead until there are too many to count. Until the bell ringers themselves collapse. Streets that were packed with life fall silent. Markets close. Bakeries shut down. And the bodies, there are so many bodies that they're stacked in pits like firewood. This was the Black Death, the deadliest pandemic in human history. And once it started, there was absolutely no escape. Between 1347 and 1353, this disease killed up to 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. In Europe alone, half the population gone in less than 5 years. This is the story of how the medieval world died and what rose from its ashes. To understand the devastation, you need to understand what was lost. The early 1300s weren't the Dark Ages people imagine. This was the High Middle Ages, a period of incredible prosperity and growth that Europe hadn't seen since the Roman Empire collapsed. Thanks to a warming climate called the Medieval Warm Period, harvests had been abundant for generations. Europe's population had nearly doubled in 200 years. Cities were exploding beyond their ancient Roman walls. Paris, Venice, Florence, London. These weren't primitive villages. They were sophisticated, densely packed urban centers bursting with trade, culture, and life. The Gothic cathedrals were rising, those soaring masterpieces of engineering that still dominate European skylines today. Universities were educating scholars, art was flourishing, technology was advancing, and most importantly, the world was connected. The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, had created the Pax Mongolica. For the first time ever, a merchant in Venice could buy silk that traveled the entire length of Asia without ever leaving protected trade routes. Spices, gold, ideas, and technology flowed across continents at unprecedented speed. It was a golden age, a time of optimism. People felt they were building something permanent, something closer to God's kingdom on earth. But that global connection was about to become humanity's worst nightmare, because the same trade routes bringing wealth were about to deliver death. The apocalypse began thousands of miles from Europe, in the windswept steppes of Central Asia, probably somewhere in modern-day Kyrgyzstan or northern China. This is a harsh, extreme landscape, endless grasslands, brutal winters, scorching summers, and living in burrows beneath this unforgiving terrain were colonies of marmots and ground squirrels. Inside these rodents lived a bacterium, Yersinia pestis. It had existed there for millennia in a relatively stable balance, infecting rodents, spreading through fleas, occasionally killing off a colony, but mostly just existing, far from major human populations, harmless to civilization. Until the 1330s, when something changed. Climate historians believe a period of severe ecological stress hit the steppes. A devastating drought followed by flooding rains that destroyed the rodents' food sources. Starving and desperate, the infected rodent populations migrated closer to human settlements along the Silk Road trading posts. The leap from animal to human happened in those crowded outposts where merchants, animals, and goods all mixed together. The first victims didn't understand what was happening. High fever, violent vomiting, and then those swellings, the buboes appearing in the lymph nodes, painful, growing, turning black with septic infection. Most died within 3 days. Most died within 3 days. By the early 1340-50s, terrifying rumors began reaching the Mediterranean. Merchants spoke of entire cities in India, Mesopotamia, and Tartary being wiped out, of rains of fire and plagues that left landscapes empty of human life. Europeans heard these stories with horror, but also detachment. These were distant lands, exotic places. Surely this couldn't reach civilized Christendom. They had no concept of germ theory, no understanding of how disease spread. They didn't realize that the spices flavoring their food and the silk adorning their churches were traveling the exact same routes as their executioner, and it was already on its way. The turning point happened at a fortified city called Kaffa on the Crimean Peninsula, jutting into the Black Sea. Kaffa was a jewel of the medieval world, a wealthy Genoese colony where east met west. Massive stone walls protected Italian merchants, Armenian traders, and a cosmopolitan mix of peoples. It was the crucial connection point between the overland Asian routes and the Mediterranean maritime networks. In 1346, Kaffa was under siege by the army of the Golden Horde, a Mongol successor state led by Khan Jani Beg. The siege had dragged on for months in brutal stalemate. The Genoese defenders were masters of fortification, resupplied by ships seemingly unbreakable. Then something started killing the Mongol besiegers. Soldiers began dying by the hundreds, then thousands. High fevers, the buboes, bodies turning dark with gangrene before death. The Mongol army was dissolving not from combat, but from disease they'd carried with them from the east. Khan Jani Beg watched his army disintegrate and made a decision that would change human history forever. In an act of desperate biological warfare, he ordered the plague-ridden corpses of his soldiers loaded onto trebuchets, massive siege weapons designed to hurl stones. For days, the sky over Kaffa rained dead bodies. Imagine being inside those walls, watching rotting, disease-riddled corpses smash onto rooftops and into market squares. The psychological horror alone would have been unbearable, but the biological impact was immediate. The bacteria in the corpses, the fleas abandoning their cold, dead hosts for warm, living humans. The fortress had been breached from within. Panic consumed Kaffa. The wealthy Genoese merchants did what wealthy people do in disasters. They used their resources to escape. 12 Genoese galleys loaded with refugees, cargo, and millions of infected fleas slipped out of the harbor. They sailed west toward home, toward safety, toward Italy. They had no idea they were carrying death itself. Those 12 ships became floating coffins. They sailed through the Bosphorus, past Constantinople, which would soon be devastated. They entered the Mediterranean, the economic engine of Europe, a network of trade moving goods and people at incredible speed. The ships stopped to resupply. At every port, dock workers rowed out to meet them, and at every port, those workers found something horrifying. Most of the sailors were dead. Their corpses were rotting on the deck. The few survivors were delirious, covered in black boils, coughing up blood. And everywhere, in the cargo holds, in the rigging, scurrying across the deck, were rats. The first major European port to fall was Messina in Sicily, October 1347. When the Genoese galleys arrived, port authorities realized too late what they'd allowed in. They ordered the ships expelled immediately. But it didn't matter. The rats had already used the mooring ropes to scurry onto the docks. Within weeks, Messina's social fabric disintegrated. The speed was paralyzing. People would be healthy in the morning and dead by nightfall. Entire families wiped out in days. The close quarters of a medieval port city, people living on top of each other, sharing wells, shopping in crowded markets, acted like gasoline on fire. Terrified residents fled to the countryside, only spreading the infection further across Sicily. News of the great pestilence spread faster than the disease itself. Other ports tried to close their harbors to ships from the east, but medieval quarantine was a joke. A ship laden with valuable spices could almost always bribe its way into port. Greed overcame caution every single time. By early 1348, the great maritime republics were crumbling. Genoa, the home port of those original death ships, was devastated. Venice, the magnificent queen of the Adriatic, faced annihilation. The Venetians, always the most practical merchants, eventually developed the concept of the lazaretto, quarantine islands in the lagoon where ships had to wait 40 days before entering the city. 40 days. 40 giorni. That's where we get the word quarantine. It was a brilliant public health innovation, but for the first wave, it was too little, too late. The gondolas of Venice became funeral barges, transporting bodies through silent canals. From Italy, the plague spread west to Marseille, the gateway to France. It crossed the Adriatic to Croatia. The coastal perimeter of Europe was breached. Now it turned inland. And that's when things got truly apocalyptic. Medieval cities were death traps waiting to happen. Imagine Paris, Florence, London, Barcelona, these magnificent centers of culture and commerce. Now imagine them as they actually were, walled enclosures of narrow, winding alleys where buildings blocked out the sun. Multi-story timber houses leaning so close together you could shake hands across the street. Open sewers running down the center of roads. Human and animal waste everywhere. No concept of sanitation. No understanding of hygiene. They were incredibly vibrant, wealthy, sophisticated places, and hygienically, they were ticking time bombs. When the plague hit a major city, it didn't just kill people, it killed society itself. The best minds of the 14th century, doctors trained at the University of Paris, the finest medical school in Europe, were completely baffled. Their entire framework was based on ancient Greek medicine, the theory of 4 humors and corrupted air called miasma. They believed a specific planetary alignment in 1345. Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in conjunction had released toxic vapors from the Earth that poisoned the air itself. So their treatments were not just useless, they were actively harmful. Doctors told people not to bathe because it would open their pores to the corrupted air. They burned aromatic woods to combat the smell of death, which did nothing. They bled patients who were already dying from blood loss. They lanced the buboes, which only spread the septicemic infection faster. Every rational attempt to fight the disease seemed to make it worse. Imagine the psychological horror of realizing that everything you know, everything you learned, everything you believe about medicine is completely useless. The Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio witnessed Florence lose perhaps 60% of its population. His accounts are chilling. The terror of contagion was so overwhelming that the most sacred bonds of humanity shattered. Fathers abandoned dying sons. Wives fled from sick husbands. The ill were walled up alive in their homes and left to die alone. Boccaccio wrote, "One citizen avoided another, hardly any neighbor troubled about others. Relatives never or hardly ever visited each other. Brothers were forsaken by brothers, uncles by nephews, sisters by brothers, and very often wives by their husbands. What is even worse and nearly incredible is that fathers and mothers refused to see and tend their children. The machinery of civilization ground to a halt. Courts closed. Laws went unenforced because there were no magistrates left alive. Bakeries stopped baking, markets shut down. The sounds of a busy city, construction, merchants shouting, carts on cobblestones, were replaced by silence. Heavy, oppressive, broken only by the constant tolling of church bells counting the dead, until the bell ringers died, or authorities banned the bells to prevent panic. The dead piled up faster than they could be buried. Churchyards, consecrated ground where Christians were supposed to be laid to rest with dignity, overflowed within days. So they dug plague pits, massive trenches where bodies were stacked like cordwood, layer upon layer upon layer, with just a thin dusting of soil between them. Thousands of bodies in a single pit. No last rites, no prayers, no dignity, just disposal. In the 14th century, there was no separation between the physical and spiritual world. Everything was God's will, so an event this catastrophic could only mean one thing. God was punishing humanity for its sins. People flooded into cathedrals, praying desperately for deliverance. They held massive religious processions through the streets, thousands of people marching together, singing hymns, begging for mercy, which only spread the pneumonic form of the plague faster, the respiratory version that spread through the air when people coughed and breathed on each other. When prayers failed, when priests died just as quickly as sinners, something dark emerged. The flagellant movement swept across northern Europe like wildfire. Bands of hundreds of men wearing identical robes marched from town to town. Twice a day, in public squares, they would strip to the waist and whip themselves with leather scourges tipped with iron spikes, drawing blood, tearing flesh, taking the sins of the world onto their own bodies in a desperate attempt to appease God's wrath. They were terrifying, fanatical, and they brought religious hysteria wherever they went. But as the death toll mounted and God still didn't answer, people needed someone to blame, something tangible to punish. A horrific conspiracy theory took root. The Jews were poisoning the wells. It made no logical sense. Jews were dying of plague just as fast as Christians. Pope Clement VI himself issued official statements condemning the theory, pointing out this obvious fact. It didn't matter. Mob mentality doesn't care about logic. Fueled by centuries of anti-Semitic hatred and the desperate need to blame someone, horrific pogroms erupted across the Holy Roman Empire and Spain. In Strasbourg, 2,000 Jews were burned alive in a wooden building. In Mainz, the entire Jewish community was slaughtered. In Cologne, the same. Hundreds of communities were destroyed. The Black Death didn't just unleash biological horror. It unleashed the absolute worst of human nature. The plague wasn't just an urban disaster. 90% of medieval Europe's population lived in the countryside, and it reached them too. Refugees fleeing the cities carried it. Traveling merchants spread it. Priests moving between parishes spread it. There was no escape. The devastation in rural areas was slower, but perhaps more profound. Thousands of small villages, whose names are lost to history, were completely wiped out. Just gone. Empty buildings, silent fields, ghosts. The manorial system, the entire economic structure of medieval society, collapsed. It relied on peasant labor to work the Lord's land. When half the peasants died, the system simply stopped functioning. Contemporary chronicles describe scenes that sound apocalyptic. Harvests rotting in the fields with no one alive to bring them in. Herds of cattle and sheep wandering aimlessly, eventually turning feral because all the shepherds were dead. Wolves, emboldened by the lack of humans, encroaching on villages. The carefully managed medieval landscape was being reclaimed by wilderness. By 1350, the plague had reached the northern limits of Europe. Scotland, Scandinavia, even the tiny Norse settlements in Greenland, delivering the final blow to those already struggling colonies. It had burned through an entire continent in less than 5 years. By 1351, the initial wave finally began to burn out. The bacterium had simply run out of easily accessible victims. When survivors emerged from their homes, they found a world that looked the same but was fundamentally, irreversibly different. The numbers are staggering, between 75 and 200 million dead across Eurasia and North Africa. In Europe alone, roughly 50% of the population gone. Imagine half of everyone you know just erased. The immediate aftermath was economic chaos. Then something remarkable happened. For centuries, the peasantry had been essentially powerless. They worked the land, they paid taxes, they did what they were told. The system was designed to keep them in their place forever. But now there was a massive labor shortage. Lords who wanted their fields worked, their estates maintained, had to compete for workers. For the first time in centuries, the peasant had leverage. Wages skyrocketed. Lords who had been absolute rulers suddenly had to negotiate. They had to offer better conditions, better pay, freedom to move to other estates if they got a better offer. The rigid structures of serfdom, the system that had locked peasants to the land for generations, began to crack. In many places, it broke entirely. Historians call this the golden age of the laborer. It was born from the ashes of the greatest catastrophe in history. But the psychological scars ran deeper than economics. Art became obsessed with death. The danse macabre, the dance of death, became one of the most popular artistic themes. Paintings and murals showed skeleton figures dancing kings, popes, merchants, and peasants to their graves. A stark reminder that death was the ultimate equalizer, that all the wealth and power in the world meant nothing when the plague came. The optimism of the high Middle Ages was shattered. The faith in institutions, in the church, in the nobility, in the old order, was broken. The society that rebuilt itself was more cynical, more questioning, more willing to challenge authority. Some historians argue that the Black Death cleared the ground for the Renaissance, that the social upheaval, the transfer of wealth, the questioning of old certainties, all created the conditions for the explosion of art, science, and humanism that followed. In the darkest way possible, death created space for new life. The Black Death was the single greatest trauma Western civilization has ever endured. It proved that no amount of wealth, no level of faith, no strength of walls could protect you from an enemy you couldn't see and didn't understand. It shattered the medieval world and forced humanity to rebuild from ruins. But here's what's haunting. Empty streets, locked homes, fear of the air itself, watching your loved ones die while you're helpless to save them. Does that sound like ancient history? Or does it feel uncomfortably familiar? We like to think we've moved past medieval ignorance, that we're too advanced, too rational, too scientific for something like that to happen again. But pandemic disease doesn't care about human progress. It doesn't care about your technology or your civilization or your confidence. It only cares about biology. And biology hasn't changed. The Black Death was a test of civilization, a test of our systems, our knowledge, our humanity. And tests have a way of repeating. The question isn't whether another pandemic will come. It's whether we'll learn from history or be doomed to repeat it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next era. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.